When Keanu Reeves walks onto the set of The Steve Harvey Show, the energy is electric. The audience expects charm, laughs, and perhaps a few behind-the-scenes stories from Hollywood. Steve is ready to guide the conversation with his usual humor and warmth. But as Keanu takes his seat and notices the Hollywood Walk of Fame pin on Steve's lapel, something shifts. The tone, the air, the purpose. What begins as a friendly interview is about to become something deeper, because in the next few minutes, Steve Harvey won't be the one asking the questions. He'll be the one trying to process what he's hearing. What Keanu says will change everything, and it starts with just one unexpected sentence. "Can I tell you something I've never revealed in public?" The studio lights dimmed slightly as the crowd settled, the anticipation palpable in the air. The familiar rhythm of Steve Harvey's theme song faded as he walked across the stage with that iconic half-grin of his, cue cards in hand, eyes full of warmth. Tonight was different from the very first second. Steve knew it. The energy felt less like entertainment and more like something profound was about to unfold. With his voice full of admiration, Steve introduced his guest not just as a Hollywood star, but as something rarer, a soul people felt connected to without ever having met. "The media calls him the most genuine actor in Hollywood," Steve announced to a chorus of applause. "The internet says he's the last humble guy left. Me? I say he's the realest example of integrity I've ever seen." The crowd roared as Keanu Reeves stepped onto the stage, dressed in his usual understated style. Dark jeans, a black shirt, and a plain blazer. Nothing flashy, just him. He waved briefly, smiled softly, and gave a slight nod, visibly uncomfortable with the overwhelming attention. As he sat down beside Steve, the energy in the room shifted again. Less show, more truth. There was no rush, no performance, just presence. Keanu spoke quietly, almost as if trying not to disturb the peace in the room. He thanked the audience, then admitted, half laughing, half shy, that this kind of reception always caught him off guard. "I'm just a guy trying to do his best," he said. Steve leaned in with a grin. "That's exactly what makes you special." They began to talk, not just about film roles and Hollywood gossip, but about humanity, about kindness, about what it meant to move through the world without pretense even when the world gave you every reason to fake it. Steve brought up Keanu's reputation, the videos of him giving up his subway seat, helping crew members on set, giving away portions of his salary to support stuntmen, camera operators, even makeup artists. "All true," Keanu confirmed, but he didn't see them as grand acts. "To me," he said gently, "it's just the right thing to do." He spoke with a sort of quiet wisdom, never dramatic, never self-important, and the audience was hanging on every word. "Everybody's going through something," he added. "Sometimes the smallest gesture can change someone's entire day." Steve nodded, deeply moved. There was something humbling about hearing those words from someone who had every reason to detach, to hide behind status and fame. Yet here he was, bare, honest, open. The conversation turned to contrast, how someone who had seen so much success could remain so grounded. "I guess I've always felt that none of this is promised," Keanu said. "I've lost a lot. And when you lose people you love, when life shakes you to the core, you realize that none of it makes you better than anyone." He paused for a moment, his eyes drifting off camera, maybe into a memory. "I grew up moving around a lot," he continued. "Born in Lebanon, raised in Canada. My father left when I was young. My sister battled leukemia. I lost my partner. I lost a child. And still, I'm here." Every day is a choice. You either let pain harden you, or you let it shape you into someone softer. The words settled like a weight on the room. You could feel it. People holding their breath, reflecting on their own pain. Steve, visibly moved, touched the small Hollywood Walk of Fame pin that gleamed on his lapel. He didn't say anything at first, just let his fingers rest there, quietly acknowledging something only he could feel. "You talk about Hollywood like you're not really part of it," he finally said. KEANU nodded. "Sometimes I don't feel like I am. Hollywood has a way of making you believe your own myth." Steve leaned back slightly, his voice softening. "You ever think about leaving it all behind?" For the first time in the interview, KEANU paused, really paused. Then he looked Steve directly in the eyes. "Yes," he said. "I believe there's more to life than fame. I've questioned it. I've walked away from projects. I've felt alone in rooms full of celebrities. But even in the falsest environments, I try to find something real. A conversation, a moment, a truth. Not always obvious, not always comfortable, but always there." Steve's hand closed around the pin. "That's authenticity," he said quietly. "Even if it doesn't have a name, even if it's just something you feel." KEANU looked at the pin now, his expression shifting. He leaned forward slightly, almost hesitating, like he was about to step off a ledge. "Steve," he said, his voice lower now, full of something different, something deeper. "Can I tell you something I've never said out loud before?" Steve didn't speak. He just nodded. KEANU took a breath, a long, intentional breath. "There was a night," he began, "a few years ago. I was at an industry party. Everyone who was anyone was there. Awards on display, champagne flowing, deals being made. I was standing in a corner, watching it all, feeling completely disconnected. The audience was dead silent. I was observing everyone," he continued, "just trying to understand why I felt so out of place, trying to feel something genuine in that room. And I overheard a conversation. It was you, talking to a young actor who was clearly overwhelmed by it all. And you said something I'll never forget. You said, 'Don't let them convince you that your worth is measured by your last box office. Success isn't about fame. It's about sleeping well at night, knowing you didn't compromise who you are.'" Steve froze. "But it wasn't just what you said," KEANU added. "It was how you said it. Like you'd lived it. And you were wearing this pin, this exact one. And I remember thinking, this man has navigated Hollywood without losing himself. Maybe I can too." Steve slowly looked down at the pin on his lapel, his fingers tightening around it. "I watched you after that," KEANU whispered. "Not as a fan, but as someone looking for guidance. And the next morning, for the first time in months, I turned down a role that would have made me a lot of money, but would have compromised my principles." He sat back slowly, almost as if the memory itself had weight. "I've never told anyone that," he said. "But I've carried your words with me ever since." Steve didn't speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice cracked. "I just spoke from experience," he said. "I had no idea anyone was listening." KEANU interrupted him gently. "That's just it. You didn't have to know. That's what made it real. You weren't trying to inspire me. You were just being yourself. And that authenticity in a place like Hollywood, that saved me." There were emotions swelling in Steve's eyes now. The studio lights reflected off a tear that escaped down his cheek. "And that pin you wear," KEANU said, his voice now full of reverence. "It's not just a symbol. It's a reminder of the choice you made. To be in Hollywood, but not of Hollywood. You think you're just an entertainer who made it? But Steve, I think you're something else." Steve looked at him, confused but open. "I think you're a guardian of truth in an industry built on illusion," Keanu said. "And I have something else to tell you. Something that might change your life the way you changed mine." The studio was silent. Even the cameras seemed to pause, and Steve, still holding the pin on his lapel, whispered one word: "I'm listening." Keanu leaned forward, his eyes never leaving Steve's, and said, "The night after I heard you speak, I made a decision. I decided that if I was going to stay in this industry, I would do it differently. I would prioritize people over projects, integrity over income, truth over fame." Steve nodded slowly, his eyes searching Keanu's face for what was coming. "It was that decision," Keanu continued, "that led me to create a foundation that helps children with cancer. It's the decision that made me give away millions to stunt crews. It's why I take the subway instead of isolating myself in luxury cars." He paused, his voice dropping even lower. "But here's what no one knows, Steve. That foundation, the one that's helped hundreds of kids with cancer, I named it after you." Steve's lips parted in shock. "Not publicly," Keanu explained. "It's registered under a different name. But in my personal documents, in my heart, it's the Steve Harvey Truth Foundation, because you reminded me that fame without purpose is just noise." Steve couldn't respond right away. His chest rose and fell with slow, emotional breaths. "You think you're just entertaining," Keanu said. "Just hosting, just surviving in Hollywood. But that night, you were doing more than that. You were reminding someone who had lost his way that integrity still matters, even here, especially here." Steve closed his eyes for a second, taking it in. "I needed to tell you," Keanu continued, "because the world knows you as a host, a comedian, a success story. But I don't think that's the full truth." Steve looked back at him, still stunned. "I think," Keanu said slowly, "you're a guardian of authenticity in a world that tries to sell us fakeness every day." A long silence followed. Steve's eyes filled again. He shook his head softly, but not in denial. More like disbelief, humble disbelief. "You ever wonder why people are drawn to you?" Keanu asked. "All the time," Steve admitted. Keanu smiled gently. "It's because they're not just hearing your jokes, they're feeling your truth. You carry something rare in Hollywood, genuine wisdom." Steve laughed a short, broken laugh. "I'm just trying to make it like everyone else." "That's what makes it real," Keanu said. "You're not trying to be anything other than who you are. And because of that, you reach people you'll never meet." He looked toward the audience now. People in rooms like this. People on the other side of a screen. People struggling with integrity like I was. Then he turned back to Steve. "And I know it's hard sometimes, carrying that kind of responsibility, not knowing if what you're saying even matters." Steve nodded slowly, visibly affected. "But I'm here to tell you," Keanu said, "it does." And just when the moment seemed to reach its emotional peak, Keanu's expression changed slightly but undeniably, more serious, more intentional. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Steve, the way you carry yourself in this industry, it's not just impressive, it's revolutionary. And tonight, I have something to tell you. Something that might change your life the way you changed mine." Steve looked up, startled by the shift. The crowd leaned in, sensing it too. "What do you mean?" Steve asked softly. Keanu's eyes didn't blink. "I've held these words for years," he said. "They came from you, and tonight, I need to say them back to you." Steve sat still, breathing unevenly. Keanu nodded once. "Because I think you may have forgotten the power they hold." The weight of the moment hung thick in the air. And then, with calm reverence, Keanu began to speak words that would change Hollywood forever. "You said, success that costs your soul is failure in disguise." Steve blinked slowly, the words washing over him like a tide he'd forgotten how to stand against. "You said, You don't need a private jet to rise above the noise. You don't need millions to matter. You don't need fame to change lives. KEANU's voice didn't waver. He wasn't reciting a script anymore. He was delivering a message. You said, "Sometimes your most important role is the one you play when the cameras are off." Steve's lips parted, but no sound came out. He was completely undone. Then KEANU looked at him gently, like someone delivering a revelation instead of a compliment. "You thought you were just entertaining people," he said. "But you were doing more than that. You were showing that Hollywood doesn't have to corrupt. You were proving that fame doesn't have to disconnect you from reality. You were carrying truth." He let those words settle before adding the one line that would break Steve's composure. "You're not just a star, Steve. You're a lighthouse." Steve's head dropped. One hand went to his face. The other gripped the pin at his chest. Tears spilled freely now. No shame, no restraint. The audience didn't move. No applause, just silence. Sacred, still, holy silence. And then KEANU said something else. Soft, almost fragile. "The way you wear that pin, it's not just a symbol, Steve. It's a statement. And tonight, I think it's pointing at something bigger than both of us." Steve looked up, tears still falling. KEANU inhaled deeply, as if steadying himself for what came next. "Because tonight, I have something to tell you, something that may change your life." Steve's expression shifted, equal parts fear and awe. KEANU leaned in, voice quiet but certain. "Like you changed mine." Steve wiped his face slowly, his hand trembling slightly as he lowered it from his eyes. The tears hadn't fully stopped, but now they mingled with a kind of stillness, a reverence that made even the lights on set seem softer. KEANU sat quietly across from him, as if waiting for the right moment to speak. And then, with a gentle exhale, he said it. "Church Steve, there's something I need to tell you, a sentence that's lived inside me for years, and I've never said it out loud until now." Steve nodded slowly, his eyes searching KEANU's. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Go ahead." KEANU leaned forward. There was no performance in his voice, only truth. "Hollywood doesn't define you," he began, "even when you think it does." Steve blinked, not moving. KEANU continued. "You thought you were just entertaining, just trying to make it in an industry that chews people up. But Steve, you were saving souls." A single tear slipped down Steve's cheek again. This one different, this one carried understanding. KEANU nodded, confirming it with a look that said, "This is real." "You saved mine," he said softly. And for a moment, no one in the room breathed. Even the cameras felt like they bowed their heads. Steve leaned back, a sound escaping his lips. Part laugh, part sob, part disbelief. "I was just trying to make it, man," he said. "Trying to get through this industry without losing myself like everybody else." KEANU nodded again. "Exactly. That's what made it powerful." The words lingered, deep, permanent. Then something happened that no one expected. Steve stood up. His body shook, not from weakness, but from something else. Something profound. He didn't speak. He simply touched the pin again and stared at KEANU with one question in his eyes. "Why me?" And KEANU had answered without hesitation. "I'll tell you." He didn't rush. He let the air carry the silence, as if inviting truth itself into the conversation. "Because Hollywood doesn't produce many like you. The ones who've been humbled. The ones who've struggled quietly behind the glamour. It chooses people who felt pain, because they know how to speak to the pain of others." Steve didn't move. His eyes glistened with something older than tears, something sacred. "You're not the most polished," KEANU continued. "You're not the most celebrated. You didn't come from money. You didn't start with connections. But the industry saw your talent, and you saw through the industry. And then, in the middle of that quiet storm, Steve whispered again, "But why me? Man, out of everybody in Hollywood, why would someone like you listen to me?" KEANU stood up too, his eyes steady. And he said nothing for a moment. Then he took a step closer, stopping just in front of Steve, and replied, "I'll tell you." The camera pushed in slowly. The audience didn't move. No one said a word, because they knew whatever KEANU was about to say next wasn't just for Steve. It was for all of them. "Why would he pick me?" Steve asked. KEANU stepped forward. "I'll tell you." The crowd was still. Some wept silently. Some held hands. No one reached for their phones. No one wanted to leave this moment. Steve finally let out a soft breath. His voice was cracked but steady. "I've thought about quitting before," he said. "Walking away from the spotlight, from all of it." KEANU nodded as if he already knew. "I have too," he replied. "More than once." They both sat back down now, not because the moment passed, but because it had deepened, shifted, settled. Steve leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes far off. "I've asked myself more than once, what am I doing in this town?" he said. "Sometimes I feel like I'm not good enough to speak on integrity, not clean enough, not consistent enough." KEANU nodded again, his voice soft and certain. "And that's exactly why your words matter." Steve looked up. "Because your voice doesn't sound like someone who's never struggled," KEANU said. "It sounds like someone who's been through it, someone who knows what it's like to lose, to struggle, to cry in the dark while the world thinks you're living the dream." There was no applause, no music, just presence. Then Steve looked at KEANU, eyes sharp with something else now, something searching. "Do you really believe," he asked, "that we can still be authentic in a world like Hollywood?" The question hung in the air, heavy, timeless. And the way KEANU looked back at him, calm, sure, almost glowing with something beyond himself, told everyone in the room that what he was about to say next would not be forgotten. KEANU didn't answer right away. He simply looked at Steve, calm but intense, as if the words needed to form in his soul before they reached his lips. Then finally he spoke. "I believe authenticity is the only thing that isn't acting." Steve tilted his head, listening. "In Hollywood, we follow scripts," KEANU said. "On camera, everything is written, edited, controlled. We rehearse pain, we fake joy. But authenticity," he paused, "authenticity has no director. It demands truth. It demands courage." He leaned in slightly, voice softer now, but more powerful. "Authenticity isn't glamorous. It doesn't win awards. It's not invited to after parties. But it saves people. Quietly. Deeply. Forever." Steve nodded slowly, his heart in his throat. "A Hollywood shows you how to act," KEANU continued. "But integrity shows you how to live." A ripple moved through the audience. Not a sound, but an energy, a shift. "Authenticity is the only path," KEANU said, "that has no spotlight, no camera, no applause. It's the one place where it's just you and your conscience." Steve couldn't speak. He simply placed his hand over his heart and nodded, overcome. "I didn't grow up understanding Hollywood," KEANU admitted. "But I've come to believe that authenticity is real. Not because someone preached it to me, but because it met me in the darkness. It met me when the cameras were off and no one else was around." He looked at Steve, eyes full of something eternal. "And it met me through you." Steve looked at him, trembling. "Not the TV version of you, the real you, the broken but still standing version. The man with a pin on his chest who had the courage to speak truth in an industry of illusions." KEANU stood up, and after a beat, Steve stood with him. They looked at each other for a long moment. Two men, two lives shaped by an industry that had tried to change them, now bound by authenticity. Then KEANU stepped forward and opened his arms. Steve walked in without hesitation. They embraced, not as actor and host, but as brother and brother. The audience stood slowly, reverently. No one clapped yet. It didn't feel right to interrupt the sacred. Finally, Steve turned to the crowd, his voice cracked but full of spirit. "I've had a lot of moments on this stage," he said. "But this was the greatest gift I've ever received." He closed his eyes for a second, then lifted his head. And with sincerity, he whispered, "Let's remember who we really are." In that studio, in front of millions of viewers, two men with stories of compromise became instruments of truth. And for a moment, Hollywood believed again.